Hello, this is the Bite Weasel, and in this video, we're going to be taking a look at making our gameplay more compelling by adding a new upgrade mechanic into the Tycoon. So, right now, we have this sort of nice looking Tycoon. We spent a bunch of time making the world look nice with, green grass and trees and a nice skybox and this sort of starting spawn place. We have these icons, we have these settings windows, all of that good stuff. But when you actually come to play the game, well, it's just kind of basic, which is fine. I mean, we've got a nice tycoon, like sort of, you can collect money and you can buy new items, whether those are things that drop more money or they upgrade existing money or they buy cosmetics. That is just your typical sort of tycoon stuff. But what I'd like to do is sort of improve the gameplay slightly by having the user make a choice on what to make next. Right now, there's only one choice, and that is to buy the next item in your tycoon. Right? Sometimes you have multiple items to buy, like a big dropper here, which will get us more money, or walls there that will make the tycoon look nicer. So that is a choice, but it's not a very meaningful one, right? In the end, you're going to have bought both of these things. So what I'd like to do is sort of make a new sort of button that basically upgrades an existing item. So then your gameplay choice becomes, do I save up a lot of money to buy the next big thing that drops? Or do I spend what little money I have now to upgrade an item I already have? And that sort of makes the gameplay more interesting because the user now has a compelling choice to make. And they can sort of make that choice based on how much money they've got, whether or not it's worth it on the math because, it's going to upgrade this a little amount versus buying a big dropper will give me a big amount, but now I have to sort of save a lot of money to do that, or I could spend it now. And sort of that inherent choice between which thing to do and sort of some of the maths that you have to sort of calculate to figure out whether it's worth it or not, that makes the gameplay slightly more interesting. So we're going to sort of look at how to do that, and I'm going to show you it in such a way that we're using all of our existing code, right? Adding a tiny new bit to get this new mechanic working so that you can go away for your game and say, okay, maybe I don't want an upgrade mechanic that was shown is in this episode, but now I have the tools to sort of edit the code myself to add the mechanic that I want for my game. So hopefully this is going to be useful and hopefully it's going to be fun to watch. So let's get going. So here we are in our existing tycoon, and we have these existing buttons for buying things, and we have a rebirth button there that allows you to reset the factory back to the beginning and start again with a multiplier. So what is our new mechanic going to be? Well, it's essentially going to be a new kind of button, an upgrade button that you can stand on and purchase multiple times. And every time you purchase it, we're going to increase some sort of counter on an existing item. So, for example, this dropper will have its upgrade count increased every time you buy an upgrade for it. And then we're going to use that upgrade count to sort of change the value of the item that it drops, right? So, first time your upgrade count is going to be 0. And so it's going to drop an item worth 100. And then when you buy the first upgrade, maybe that item will now be 110. And then when you buy a second upgrade, maybe it's 120 and 130 and so on and so on. So that's really what our mechanic is going to do. Because then it's going to give you a choice between do you save up for the new item that's going to, drop something worth 100, or do you upgrade an existing item that's going to increase it by 10 or 20 or 50 or whatever we decide to do with the actual balancing of the numbers? So, how do we implement it? Well, really, it's going to rely on our existing code that handles these buttons, but we're going to change it slightly to handle upgrading instead of purchasing, right? So, we've already done something similar with the rebirth button, and we'll just expand on that for our upgrade button. So let's duplicate one of these existing buttons. So we can duplicate this and we can move it over here into a new position. We'll rename it upgrade button. And we'll sort of, just for our own sense of coordination, we'll sort of change the color. It can be this white bluey greeny color, and we'll update this label from the word dropper to the word upgrade, right? If you recall, the actual name in the hierarchy and this sort of text label doesn't matter because the text label gets updated with the script, and this hierarchy name isn't important. Instead, what's important is this unlock ID. So this is important because it's what we use to store in the profile service database to know whether or not we should show this button after you've quit and come back because you've purchased it. And it sort of allows us to say, hey, I want you to show this button when this other button has been purchased, right? So we need a unique ID for these things. Otherwise, our script will complain when we start the game. So we're just going to call it worth1, right? Because it's going to upgrade the worth of dropper1. But you can really call these things whatever you like as long as you have a unique ID for it. And the cost can be, whatever you want. Let's make it cost, I don't know, 100. Now, one of the interesting things about our upgrade button is not only can you purchase it more than once, but we're going to have the cost increase every time you purchase it. So that also makes an interesting sort of thing that you can balance, like how much is the cost going to update every time? And it gives the player a more interesting thing. Oh, I can buy one of these upgrades, but it's going to increase the cost of the next upgrade. And so at some point, it's going to be more cost efficient to buy the next item versus upgrading. And that's going to be a compelling sort of choice for the user to make. Now, what those numbers look like, I'm going to have to leave to you because it balances based on, what the worth of your items are that are dropping, how many different droppers you have or upgraders on the line, and so on. So I'm just going to give some example sort of mathematical formulas and some example sort of beginning numbers. But when you come away to your game and do something similar, you're going to have to make sure the numbers make sense for your game, right? So we have this upgrade button now, but how can we tell our script that this is an upgrade button versus any other regular kind of button? Well, we're doing that already with these tags. So we don't want to remove this existing button tag because if you remember, our button script works by looking for the button tag using the collection service and then adding all of this nice logic to make sure that the button can be pressed by standing on it, make sure that the text labels are updated and all of that good stuff. So we definitely want to keep that tag around, but we're going to add a brand new tag and we're going to call it the upgrade tag, not to be confused with the upgrader, which is this sort of piece of the factory that makes the worth of an item like double when it passes through the upgrader. This is going to upgrade the base drop value of an item. So we added a new upgrade tag. So let's head over into our script and sort of use that tag. Now, the first thing that we want to do is basically get that upgrade button to do something different when it gets pressed. So when the user stands on it, assuming that they have enough money and that they have a profile and, all of that good stuff still happens, we are going to do something different. Now, we already have logic in here that looks for the rebirth tag. So let's just refactor this a little bit so that we can add a new kind of tag in here. So right now, this is saying if the button doesn't have the rebirth tag. So let's change that. If the button has the tag rebirth, then do the rebirth behavior. Else, oops, that's one word. Else, if the button has the tag upgrade, which is the one we just added, then do something else. Otherwise, if it doesn't have either of those tags, do the regular buying behavior, right? So that's pretty straightforward. Now it will go through when the user stands on the button. If it's a rebirth button, we do this. If it's an upgrade button, we do this. And if it's a regular buying button, we do this. So what is our upgrade button going to do? Well, it's going to be very similar to our existing button here. We do want it to do this, which is firing an event to the client. And that event in the client side makes it play a nice sound and makes it show a particle emitter. So we still kind of want to do that. So let's copy that bit of code in there. We also want it to cost money, obviously. So let's remove the cost from our profile data money, which gets stored into the database and is all good. But then we don't want it to buy an item. Instead, we want it to do something else. We want it to upgrade an item, right? And so in a very similar way that we have buying an item based on whichever button you pressed, we'll have an upgrade an item based on the button you pressed. Now the difference is here we store this information in the profile table. In fact, this could just be the word profile because we already get it up here. So we store the button's unlock ID into the unlocked items table set to true. Now, this sort of means that you can only ever buy this thing once because it's either going to be true or false. For upgrading, we want to be able to buy the item more than once. So instead of having a true or false value, this is going to be a number for us. But we don't want to mess around with our existing unlocked items table. We want a brand new table that can hold the upgrade count for things, right? So let's head on over to our data script and change our profile template, which is where all of these things are stored. And we can say upgrades is a new table, and that is where we'll store the count of how many times each item has been upgraded. And so we can do it in a very similar way to this. We can grab this profile table, but instead of unlocked items, it's obviously upgrades. And we can set the button's unlock ID, which, if you recall, we changed to this unique thing called worth1. So every upgrade will have a unique ID, so this will work great. And instead of being equal to true, we'll equal to some sort of count. Now, what is that count going to look like? Well, we have to increase it from whatever the original one was, right? So let's first look up the count from this table. That's going to give us our current count, which will default to be nil. So that's important because if you try and add 1 to nil, so if we did count plus equals 1 and count was nil, this would not work because it doesn't really know how to add 1 to nil. So we need to make sure that if not count, then count gets set to 0 to begin with, right? So the first time you buy it, it's going to say, oh, we don't have something in that table. It's going to be nil. So let's set it to 0, and then we increase it by 1. So the first time you buy it, it will be set to 1. And then the next time you buy it, it will increase it to 2 and 3 and 4 and so on. And that will get stored into the data table. So next time you load the game, this table will also be updated with the correct number of times you've unlocked an upgrade for each item. So that's cool. So now really only thing that we need to do is make this upgrade item function do something inside our helper script. So let's do that. So we'll go over to our helper script and we'll go down to wherever our buy item function is. So we want something very similar. In fact, we can just copy this. So instead of buying an item, we're going to upgrade an item. Right, and it's going to pass in that button that we are using to upgrade. But then we also kind of need to know how many times we are upgrading it. So it's going to be a number. And let's go back and pass that number in. So that's going to be the count, right? Whatever the current value is, that is what we should upgrade the item to. So back in our helper script, we now have the button that we're using to upgrade and the count of how many times it's going to have been upgraded. So what do we want to do now? Well, let's get the associated item from that item to buy value. If you remember, when we duplicated this button, the actual item to buy object value is going to also have been duplicated, and it's going to point at that existing one. So if I right click this, go to reference object, you'll see that it's pointing at this one. So if I was to duplicate this button, that button would be pointing to the upgrader, for example. So this is great. The fact that we're using item values means that when you duplicate things, those references stay intact, so we can use them in our script. So basically, we've got this to upgrade item. So this is what we're going to upgrade. And how do we upgrade it? Well, it's going to be really simple. We're going to do a very similar thing to how we're doing everything else. We're going to set an attribute called upgrade count, and we're going to set it on that object, which is the dropper, and we're going to set it to whatever value we've currently upgraded it by, right? So the first time this will be set to 1, second time it'll be set to 2, 3, 4, and so on. And that's good. And then we can use this upgrade count attribute in our dropper to basically calculate what the value of the dropped item should be based on its default drop value and how many times it's been upgraded and whether or not you have a rebirth multiplier and so on. So we can do that bit in a minute, but we also want to make sure that our upgrade button gets an increased cost for each time that you've bought an upgrade, right? So the first upgrade might be worth 100, but when you buy it the second time, maybe it's worth 150 and then 200 and so on. And this will also sort of work with that balancing that you can do on your gameplay to make it interesting for the user and also not too overpowered that, upgrading is always the right choice to make. So let's set a local cost to be 100 plus the count times, I don't know, 50. So you can basically make some sort of mathematical formula here based on your game, right? So I'm just going to say the base cost is 100 plus how many times you've bought the upgrade. So if you buy it the first time, this will be 1, so it will be 150 to buy the next one, right? And then we can say button set attribute cost to be cost. There you go. That's going to increase the cost of our button. Because if you recall, this cost attribute is what we use in the button script to say how much does this button cost. So that's good. But what we're going to notice is that the labels on these buttons don't update. So even though we've added this attribute and we've updated it for the cost, that's not going to be reflected in the UI because this part of the script where we set the cost text label only gets run once. So let's fix this bit of code so it runs more than once. How can we do that? Well, we've done a similar thing before by an attribute changed event. So let's use that. First, let's wrap this into a local function called update labels. Right? That's going to look like this, and basically it's just going to do this amazing bit of code that updates the labels. Makes sense, I guess. Then the first time that the collection service finds a button, we're going to call this function so that the labels get updated whenever a button is added into the world. But now we also want it to automatically update whenever the cost attribute changed. So we can say object get attribute change signal. And which attribute do we want to look at? We want the cost attribute. And then whenever it changes, we want to fire an event. So we're going to listen to that event with the connect method. And what function do we want to run when the cost changes? Well, this update labels one that we just created up there. So now every time the cost attribute changes, this signal is going to fire, going to run the update labels thing, which is going to update the cost of the label in the billboard GUI. So this is really nice. One problem, though, is that the title of the button is going to get changed to whatever item we are upgrading, right? This is fine for buying. We take the name of the button directly from whatever dropper we're sort of linked to. But for upgrade buttons, we want to do something slightly different. So we can just say, does this object have that upgrade tag? So if it has the upgrade tag, we know it's a special upgrade button. Then we want to do something else. Otherwise, do the exact buying button logic that we already had. So what do we want this to do? Well, we want the title to be the word upgrade instead of the name of the item that you're linked to. But maybe we want to sort of add a different number based on, how many times it's been upgraded. So something like this. The first time it will be upgrade plus 0, and then the next time might be upgrade plus 1, and so on and so on. So we need to grab this count from that sort of table that we already have. Either we can get it from the upgrades table, or we can get it from the attribute that we change in here. Either one's going to work because they both end up being the same number. I think the easiest for us is to just grab this item to buy value and grab the attribute from there. So we can say local count equals the item to buy, which do we have in here somewhere? I guess it looks like this. The item to buy, which is basically means our linked items, upgrade count attribute. And instead of setting it, we're going to be getting it. So now we'll have that count, and it'll either be nil, or 1 or 2 or 3. So just to make sure it's not nil, we can say if not count, then do this, otherwise do this. Right? So if we have a count, we'll make sure that we've created this nice upgrade plus 1 or plus 2 or plus 3. And if we don't have a count because we've never upgraded it before, it can just be the word upgrade. So now when we change the cost, it's going to come through this sort of update labels function due to this signal event. We're going to say if it's a button with an upgrade tag, grab the associated item's upgrade count and then change the label. So it says upgrade, or it says upgrade plus 1, plus 2, plus 3, right? I think we actually want to show the next count, right? The first time you buy it, it's just going to say upgrade, but then we'd want it to say upgrade plus 2, I think. So that looks good. We have our button script updating labels. We have it actually, adding something into our database that we can store later. And we have it actually upgrading some attribute and changing the cost. The only thing left to do really is to use this upgrade count in the dropper itself. Right? So let's grab this bit of code that we just wrote that sort of grabs that upgrade count, sorry. And then let's go into the dropper script. So this dropper script is the thing that basically instantiates a new drop part, gives it a value, and then places it into the world so that it can drop onto the conveyor belt and get purchased. So we already have some code here that sort of changes the worth of this dropped item. And basically what we do right now is we get the default value, which you can set on each dropper. And then if you have a rebirth, we sort of multiply it up. Well, we can also do something similar and say, if we have an upgrade count, do something. So again, we could grab it from the profile table, much like we do here, or we could grab it from the attribute. Either one is going to work because they both end up being the same number. So let's say dropper colon get attribute upgrade count. So this is going to be our upgrade count for this particular dropper. And we'll say if upgrade count, then do something. So we'll make sure that it's not set to nil because we've never upgraded this thing before. So if you do have an upgrade count, then the worth can be, the worth plus 50 times the upgrade count. I don't know. So some sort of balancing here, maybe 20. So again, this is another mathematical formula that you'll have to choose based on the, mechanics and costs and number of items in your game. So for now, this just gives you a nice example. But you may want to change these numbers, change this formula based on how it works for your game. But essentially what happens is we get the existing worth of the drop that's going to happen. We check to see if it's been upgraded at all. And if it has, we're going to add 20 for each time it's been upgraded. So I think this should work. Let's test it out by playing the game. Uh-oh, we've made a mistake. Could not find unlock ID worth 1 in the unlock order table. That's right. So I'm so glad that we went through and we made this sort of protection script to prevent us from breaking our game when we forget to do something. So if you remember, when we made this new upgrade button, which is here, we gave it a new ID, but we didn't go into our helper script right at the top to say, when should we show this ID? So I think we should show the upgrade button whenever you buy the first dropper, right? So when you buy the first dropper, we'll show the first dropper's upgrade button. But the other thing you need to do is when they buy this button for the first time, what should it unlock, like show in the Tycoon? Well, I don't think anything. So we'll just leave it as a blank table like we did for the Dropper 3 and the Rebirth. But you can maybe do something different. The first time they upgrade one, maybe it makes a second upgrader button appear. And maybe that one like triples the value or something. So there's a whole bunch of sort of gameplay mechanics and balancing that you can do with these existing systems to make your game pretty interesting. Okay, so now that we've done that, we should not see an error, which we don't, so that's good. But when we buy this first dropper, we should see our new button. And there it is. So right now, these things are dropping an item worth $100, which is kind of high for a game, but that's fine. And this button costs 100. So if I stand on it now, what we see is that the labels got updated. Now it says upgrade +2 when I buy it next time. It costs a new amount, and the item that is dropping is worth more. So now I have this interesting sort of mechanic. Do I upgrade this again to get 140, or do I save up to buy the upgrader? Right? And so it's not that exciting of a choice right now, but you can imagine if this dropper had an upgrader, what do I do? Do I buy the new dropper by saving up? Do I upgrade this dropper, which originally is worth more, so maybe the upgrade is worth more? Or do I upgrade this original one? Because even though it's going to be worth a little less at the beginning, it passes through the upgrader, which doubles the value. So now I have all these interesting sort of mathematical formulas to think which is the most important, purchase for me and the way that I play this game. So even with that small amount of code and, using our existing systems, we've already made the game slightly more interesting than just a regular tycoon that only has one choice to make, which is which item to buy next. Now, do you buy an item? Do you upgrade an item? It's much more exciting. So the only thing that we have missing now is to make sure that when you save and load an existing tycoon, these upgrades get applied based on whatever is in that data table that we changed. So we already have a mechanism for doing something similar inside our factory script. We refactored it a bit to have this assign factory logic that gets called several times. One, when you sort of rebirth, or two, when a player joins the game, right? So we can update this to make sure that our items not only get unlocked if you've bought them, but get upgraded if you've purchased an upgrade. So it's going to look very similar. Instead of getting the items table, we're going to get the upgrades table, right? And we're going to call it, I guess, upgrades. Instead of skipping if it's not in the unlock table, we're going to check that it's in the upgrades table. And if it is, we're basically going to say helpers.upgrade item part, and then how many upgrades? Well, it's this value right here. So that should work for us. And that was pretty simple, just going through each item in the factory and saying, if it's got an upgrade, then we better upgrade it. Otherwise, if it's not unlocked, then just continue. And if it is unlocked, then buy it. So we can sort of make it a little less confusing, perhaps, by moving that in there and putting this comment right here. So that says the item has been unlocked. So let's rebuy it. We can add a comment here that says the item has been upgraded. So let's upgrade it. Something like that, right? So that's how the logic basically works. And now to test this, what I'm going to have to do is save this over to Roblox. So hopefully you are already doing this and you don't need to sort of overwrite an existing game every time. But I'm using local files, which doesn't work with that profile service. But once you've saved it to Roblox, now we will indeed be able to load and save our factory. But because I've played it a whole bunch, I probably don't have anything to unlock. So let's use our plugin and our data script sort of table name here to delete my existing save file, right? And if you recall, we sort of talked about how you can use this plugin or any other plugin that's very similar to sort of delete that saved data. And now if I play the game, I should have a brand new tycoon because I have no saved data. But if I buy this and then wait for this to give me some money, I should be able to now buy an upgrade. And if I quit and restart the game, this hopefully should say upgrade +2, and these should be dropping 120. Let's see if that works. Stop, which should have saved the profile. We're now reloading it. Let's take a look. Upgrade +2, and these things are dropping 120. So that was really easy. A small bit of script change here in all of our existing code, and you've already got this new mechanic. So that's pretty cool. And hopefully you can use these same ideas to make an expanded system for your game. So the only thing really left to do is to make more than one of these upgrade buttons. So we can do it in several ways. We can duplicate this button and sort of change it to look like this, or we can duplicate the upgrade button and change the item to buy, aka the linked value, right? So we can go in this new upgrade button, we can choose item to buy, we can choose the value, and instead of upgrading that original dropper, we're going to upgrade the upgrader, which I don't entirely know if that makes sense. We'd need some more code, actually. We can give it a new ID, we can give it a new cost if we want, and then we have to update this script. So it's going to be update worth 2, and worth 2 doesn't unlock anything new. But now if I was to play the game and teleport to my tycoon, buy this upgrader. Oh, actually, we don't have enough money. Dum-ba-dum-ba-dum. We should see that new upgrader button. Woo! Which we can use to upgrade the upgrader. Except it doesn't actually do anything because the upgrader is not using that value, right? So if you did want to upgrade an upgrader, you basically have to open your upgrader script, which is in this server script storage, upgraders, and you would have to change this value. So right now, we're sort of setting the value attribute to be ×2. Okay, cool. But we could look up the number of upgraders, much like we do with this dropper, very similar, and change that value, right? So the upgrade count is now the upgrader get attribute, upgrade count, and then the current is going to be current plus some value. Like, it depends how you want to do it. Maybe you could like multiply it by 2.1, 2.2, 2.3. Maybe you upgrade the base count and then you do it. I don't know. It all depends on you. But this is how you would upgrade an upgrader. So now if I was to play, I'm not entirely sure what number I'll end up with when something passes through this value. It's now 240, even though it originally comes through as 100. Now you're probably thinking, why is that not upgrade 2, even though you saved it? Well, I reset my profile off recording. So now it should be 240, but because we've upgraded the upgrader, it's 280. And I think that's cool because now, ooh, which do I choose? So many decisions to make. And you can keep doing that for each one. The only other thing that I want to fix is that right now, my default cost gets overwritten, right? So even though I set this cost to be 200, when I played the game inside the helper script, that mathematical formula is not looking at that base value, which is unfortunate because I kind of want it to use that so I can specify in design mode what the base cost will be, but then have the multiplier keep going up from that base cost. So we could grab the cost attribute and sort of use this, but then it's going to be a bit more complicated because we're overwriting these things when you send in a new count. So the base cost would then be whatever the cost was before, which has already changed. So it's a bit more complicated. I don't really want to go through and add a new base cost attribute to absolutely everything. I want my script to do it for me. So I'm not saying this is the best way of doing it, but it is a very cheap way of doing it. What you can do is you can say button.getAttribute base cost, right? And then if there's not a base cost, then we've never ever set the base cost before. We'll set it to be the existing cost, right? So the very first time you call this, we're going to take the cost, so cost that has never been changed, we're going to set it to this base cost attribute. And now we can grab that base cost every time because we know it's going to be there. We know it's only ever going to be updated once the first time, so it's going to be the actual value. So now if I play, we should see that that upgrader is now worth 200 plus 50 instead of 100 plus 50, right? So that's actually working pretty nice. And then you can go away and you can do that exact same thing for every other button, right? You can duplicate it again. You can link it then to this upgrader instead of, sorry, this dropper instead of the next one, and so on and so on and so on. Making sure to update the cost and the unlock ID, right, for each one of these things. And there you have it, a nice new mechanic for your game, and hopefully enough information that you can sort of expand upon it for your own game. So that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, like and subscribe, leave a comment, ring that notification bell, all that good stuff, and I will see you next time.